I'm anti-nonsense. I'm anti-delusion, deluding yourself, like changing economic laws because they're too inconvenient, and so bending economic laws to your own ideology. No, let's all agree what the economic laws are that creates the most amount of wealth in the fairest way. And then on top of that, we can impose our ideology in terms of how we think we should best redistribute some of that wealth to others who really need it, or how what we should spend on infrastructure or whatever.
Taking a minute to be myself, don't need no help. We keep on rising.
All right. So, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for continuing to tune into the show, this Unlocking Commerce in Business. And business seems to be all around us these days. I'm Connie Davis, your host. I am really excited about today's conversation as we kick off really what I consider to be season 2. And we're starting off in the month of April. So, it's not April Fool's Day. I'm super excited about having my guest, Paul Musson, on the show today. Paul is someone that connected with me in this podcast community as we all start talking about finding really meaningful guests for our show. And Paul is an award-winning investor and an author now of this book that I have now completely embraced as the Bible of economics for me as I lean into the future of our money systems, which you guys hear me talk about all the time here as we talk about commerce and what commerce actually means. And I feel like we have like one of the major thought leaders on the show today. So, Paul, welcome. Thank you for being here with me.
Well, thank you, Connie. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I have been reading your book, Capital Offence. It took
Thank
me a
you.
little while to get it. And when it showed up, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to dig in. So I've been geeking out on economics, all things economics, because I love the word commerce. I love the meaning of the word commerce and the value of humans that get to participate in healthy commerce systems. And so, what I've been talking about on this show, if you haven't caught those episodes, guys, out there, is places where commerce gets locked up, where the flow of commerce doesn't happen the way that we intended it to when money was really introduced into the marketplace. And the history of money teaches us some of that. And Paul, you are a professor, I want to say, in all things economics and investing capital. Will you share a little bit of your background with the audience so that they know the perspective of where you're coming from and talk to us a little bit about the project that this book became for you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for reading it. And it took you a while to get the book because my publisher is in the UK and they were using a distributor in America. They were using Chicago University Press. Wasn't working out for some reason. They've changed to Simon and Schuster, I think it is. And since then, distribution is good. So if you order it, it'll come quickly now, but I apologize for the delay it took to
Yay.
get to you.
I want everybody to have a copy of this. If they're doing anything with money these days, they need to have a copy of this book.
Well, thank you very much. So, yeah, I'll start off by saying I'm not an economist. I was a professional investor for my career, and it was a long and circuitous path to get there, which is something else we can talk about. But um, as I was investing, I thought that I was playing a very important role, like many other investors, and that what we were doing is channeling our clients' capital, their hard-earned capital. They created capital. They provided some sort of customer value proposition for their customers. They received capital in exchange. They consumed some of it. They saved the rest, gave it to us. And then we would go around the world looking for the best businesses who would put that capital to the most productive use. They would create more capital with it. Their profit would go up. They'd hire more people, pay them more. That higher profitability would push the share price up. And if most companies in the stock market are all doing that, then the stock market starts to go up. Now, importantly, the stock market going up, this is now a symptom of lots of good stuff going on in the economy. Capital being put to productive use more people being hired, more jobs being created. That's the way it's supposed to work. Increasingly, it's not, which we'll get into in a second. So, and this is, by the way, this is how a free market capitalist system is supposed to work, where you are only supposed to benefit to the extent that you benefit somebody else. Now, increasingly, it's becoming a benefit at the expense of somebody else. And that's why people are getting very angry. They're blaming the wrong things. And so the risk is they've misdiagnosed the patient and will prescribe the wrong medicine, which we can also get into later. So anyway, so this is the job, and I love my job. I love my team, my company. But over the years, starting around 05, 06, I was very naive, unaware of what was going on. And then I started to understand how central banks were manipulating asset prices and really doing so with good intentions, I will say. This is not a conspiracy theory. But they were manipulating asset prices higher because they believe, this is my opinion, they believe that driving asset prices higher is good for the economy. It's not. If asset prices are going higher because the economy is in good shape and pushing those asset prices higher, that's good. But if you artificially drive asset prices higher in the hope that somehow it will then pull the economy up and the benefits will all trickle down to everybody else, that's not good because it's not going to happen. And it hasn't happened. And it's resulted in growing wealth disparity in not only in America, but most developed economies. And so as I was seeing this, and we can go into details with the specific mechanisms that they use, I started getting very angry. And and particularly in the wake of the great financial crisis in '08, '09. And so I started studying economics at that time. So about 18 years ago. And just to understand what the hell is going on here. Why are they doing this? It doesn't make any sense to me. And so since then, that's all I've done. It's an 18-year journey of studying economics, going back hundreds of years, different schools of thought, to really go back to sort of first principles, fundamentals, build an infrastructure of knowledge and understanding and common sense, by the way, and to try and figure this out. And so then over the years, I was talking to my clients. My clients would have been financial advisors, stockbrokers, financial planners, and I would explain to them what was going on. And I would explain it in very easy to understand terms, just like I've written my book, because I want to empower people with truth, knowledge, understanding, help them with their business. And communication started to become my great passion, my quarterly reports and stuff like that. And then over the years, a number of my clients said, Paul, you should really write a book about this because you're the only one who really talks about it in this way that we know of. And I had no intention of writing a book, but the more people said it, I thought, well, maybe I should. And so I started the book in 2019, and I was still working. And so I couldn't finish the book because I could only write on vacation because, professional investors, pretty busy job, And so I left Mackenzie, which was my employer, in 2023, so almost 3 years ago, and was able to finish the book. I also started a free blog, which I put out once a week. People can sign up for it. Just put your email in. There's no catch, no credit card, just it's free. And where I do the same thing, I try to explain what's happening and have some fun with it. And yeah, so the book got published last year. The blog has been going for
Congratulations.
4 years, almost 4 years now. And so, yeah, I'm just trying to spread the word, help people understand with the goal of changing the system for the better. And our policymakers are not bad people. I don't believe that. It has resulted in massive wealth disparity, but I don't believe that was their goal. And
Yeah.
the politicians, policymakers cannot do the right thing today because doing the right thing would be very painful. It needs to be done, but they can only do it once we, the people, demand it. So the voice has to come from below. It's got to be like a grassroots movement of people demanding the right things from our leaders, and then they will do it because that's how you stay in power. And there's an old saying that the people always get the government that they deserve. But that's only true if the people actually understand what's going on. And so that's what I'm doing. Others are doing the same thing. And the reason is that the system we currently have is unintentionally very unfair and is not sustainable, and it will end very badly unless we change it ourselves. So just trying to get ahead of it. So that's sort of my journey up to this date.
Wow. And there's so many there's so many important things that you said in that kind of recap of where you've been the last several years, in 18 years to voluntarily just start studying and going back to the principles of economics is, that's impressive alone because, you already said you had a stressful job. I know you've been raising a family. You've got this, really just long tenure in, investing other people's money. And that takes a lot of responsibility. And I think you've taken it very seriously. And one of the things you touched on that I hear a lot in my community, and it's why I named the show the way that I did of unlocking commerce is when we don't have equality in certain knowledge based systems, right? And there's things that people don't get taught, the principles of things. And we learn by way of someone else's and what they've learned and then they learned based on the way that someone else taught them, but we never really get to the true foundation of something and how it was intended to be unless we go digging ourselves. And I feel like a couple of years ago, I went for the Great American Teach-In, and the basics of money, which is really the first kind of area I wanted to dive into because you spent a lot of time at the beginning of the book, Paul, laying the groundwork for, I feel like the definitions of what money actually came from. So I always talk about past, present, future of money. The basics of money, though, in our 8 and 9 year olds, I was teaching a history of money class to some 8 and 9 year olds for the Great American Teach-In a couple of years ago. And those kiddos, when I asked the question, where does money come from? They said, comes from my mom and dad's debit card. That's where it comes from.
Uh-huh.
And, they really meant like they didn't really know. They don't really know where money actually comes from. They just know how to spend it. And that's the consumption based economy that we've created for
Yeah.
consumers, even the words that we use in the marketing and the banking and all of the systems that oversee our money system and govern that. The basics of money. So I wanted to dive into that and give you a chance to talk to the audience today a little bit about the restoration of the fundamentals of economics that you really spoke to, and this money systems that are in the they have underlying principles to the why and why things and how we drifted away from them. And that's kind of what I wanted to spend some time in today's episode. So let's talk about a concept you talked about in the book that I really enjoyed. I wish I had heard about it in my high school economics class, but I did not. That was in the 90s. And this broken window fallacy. Let's spend some time there. I think that's really important for up and coming youth to understand how the contributions of what they're learning to do in school for skills and how that affects their choice to use money and what I use the word ripple effect all the time of other people's ripple effects in their community. And can you share that broken window fallacy with us?
Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, so the broken window fallacy, this was put forth by Frederick Bastiat, a French economist in the sort of the mid 1800s. And so the broken window fallacy really is about, and so this is how long this fallacy has been around, and it's still around, is that, and the reason it exists, let me back up a second. Economy, you mentioned consumption. So many economists and politicians think that consumption is the fount of all economic prosperity, that you can consume your way to riches. Of course, you cannot. But because your consumption, when you go and you buy, let's say, a fridge for $500, you've just provided the fridge seller with an income of $500. So your $500 was transferred to them. So you consumed by buying a fridge. That was somebody else's income. And so they think we got to get more people to consume so more people have an income. But you cannot consume unless you first have produced something. So it's production, saving, investment, and production, or working, that gives you the wherewithal to then go and consume. So consumption is not the fount of economic prosperity. It is the result of economic prosperity, is the result of saving and investment, producing capital, and then exchanging that capital with each other. So for instance, let's say you make a bike, you just created capital. I make a suit, I've just created capital. And then we exchange that capital with each other. I've got your bike, you've got my suit, and importantly, nobody else suffered as a result of this transaction. Nobody else is worse off. No one was coerced to do anything. Now, if we just exchange that capital with each other, that's called direct exchange or barter. But you can't have a large economy with barter. It just doesn't work. You know, how many kitchen chairs does it cost to take a flight to Florida? And it gets ridiculous, right? So we use the medium of exchange called money. So money is simply used to exchange all the capital that's being produced in the economy. So you would sell your bike, let's say for $1,000, nice bike. You've got your money. Your bike is effectively stored up in that money temporarily, and then you use your money to buy my suit. So it's indirect exchange. So just a little background there. Now, broken window fallacy. If there is a hurricane coming or something, and it hits a part of America, and there's all this destruction, every now and then you'll hear some commentator on the news, well, this is really bad, but this is going to be a real boost for the local economy because they're going to have to hire all sorts of people to rebuild things and repave the roads, and you're going to have to pay them all to do this, so it's going to be a real boost, shot in the arm to the local economy. It's ridiculous. How can destruction be good for the economy? So the broken window fallacy goes like this. So let's say you have your bike shop, and the next day you come and you find that your front window has been smashed by some local hooligans. Well, these commentators now think that's going to be good for the economy because you're going to have to spend $1,000 to pay the glazier to fix your window. So the glazier was sitting there doing nothing, and now all of a sudden, he or she's got $1,000 of income because somebody smashed your window. But obviously, you're now $1,000 worse off. All it is
Right.
first a destruction of capital. So the window was destroyed. So that's gone. That's not good. And then there's a redistribution of capital. You had $1,000 in your bank account, and you had to transfer it effectively into the glazier's bank account. So your $1,000, no capital was created, was just redistributed your $1,000 into his or her bank account, and now your window has been replaced. So nobody's better off, or society's not better off. You're worse off. The glazier's better off. Now, when they're calculating GDP is a measure of all final spending. So that $1,000 you spent is going to get added to GDP. So now it looks like GDP just went up $1,000. Well, yes, because that's how they calculate it. But no capital was created because GDP does not include the destruction of capital. It doesn't subtract $1,000 because that window was subtracted. So there should be no increase in GDP. All it is an increase in spending. But that's not what drives an economy forward. And so then I kind of made a joke that politicians believing in this fallacy, if they hear a hurricane is coming, they might even try to take credit for the hurricane if it's going to be a boost to the local economy, you know? So it gets really stupid. And, but yeah, consumption does not drive economic growth and prosperity. It is a result, an outcome of economic prosperity.
Yeah, and as you're describing the destruction, I'm thinking of, I live down here in Florida, and every time there's a hurricane, there's always the jokes that flow around. The Floridians just go out and we buy booze and we buy alcohol and we have a party. And, it stimulates the economy, the economic spend, the consumption certainly goes up.
Yeah.
And, then we deal with the outcome of the storm where everybody else is kind of hunkered down and, it's like, worried about the storm and the damage, and we're just kind of we gauge it. So it's always kind of a joke, but the weather has certainly created a whole bunch of skepticisms around: are we creating those weather storms? Are we creating things that actually cause this economic consumption?
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother conversation for a different day. But thank you for going through that broken window fallacy, because when the students don't really understand that, how to create money is tied to their productivity and activities and being part of a community that creates something so that those assets and capital can be circulated in that local economy. I think that's a fundamental principle that we're not teaching in our financial literacy classes. What do you think of, how do you feel about financial literacy as a concept these days?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been crucial, but it really hasn't been taught. Now, some will claim that that is deliberate, that they don't want people to understand it. I'm not sure if I believe that. It could be, but look, I'll go back to that in a second. I just want to finish off on something that we were just talking about, and I should have said it earlier. So consumption, and consumption is an outcome. So consumption, your spending can be an outcome of one of two things. So it can be a result of you producing a bike, creating capital, which gives you the wherewithal to go out now and buy a suit or whatever. Or it could be a result of you taking on debt and consuming that way. So obviously, if you're consuming through debt, then that income that you're providing the suit maker is not sustainable because you can only take on so much debt. And so policymakers have encouraged the whole population to
Mhm.
uh, practice debt-fueled consumption, take on more and more debt and spend because it's good for GDP. It drives that final spending number higher and higher, but it's not sustainable because it's not being driven by the production of more and more stuff. That's the fount of all economic prosperity. So just that's the reason why we have so much debt. Like household debt to GDP in Canada is over 100% now. We're one of the highest in the world. And the economy is starting to falter. Uh, GDP per capita has been declining. I mean, it's a terrible situation. But the trouble is, you can get away with it for a long time and things look like they're okay until they're not. It's like
Until
and
they're not.
you could be warning people about this, deficits aren't good, debt's not good, and then be, "Hey, look, the economy hasn't blown up yet. I guess you were wrong 10 years ago." No, I was right. It's the economy's been getting worse, we just haven't had a blow up. I liken it to someone who's got a bad diet. They drink too much, they smoke too much, eat too much, they don't exercise, and you say, "Look, you better start taking better care of yourself, this is not you're not on a good path here." 10 years later, they still haven't had a heart attack. So now they call you an idiot for being worried about the diet and lifestyle 10 years prior. But eventually it happens. And you're also not as efficient. You're not as energetic as you would be otherwise. If you hadn't had this poor lifestyle, you'd be doing more things, but you can't see all the things that you would have been doing if you had felt better about yourself, right? So you can't, it's a unproven counterfactual. Anyway, so in terms of financial literacy, a couple of other people have asked me about this recently. And would it be a good idea to start teaching more about basic economics in school, even in elementary school, definitely high school? And so just to give people a better so we don't kid ourselves about this something for nothing myth that there's such a thing as a free lunch, that if you take out of the system more than you put in, it comes at somebody else's expense. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But you just can't see who it is who's funding you. Sometimes you need to be funded. Sometimes you fall on hard times. I'm not anti-government by any means, but I'm anti-nonsense. I'm anti-delusion, deluding yourself, like changing economic laws because they're too inconvenient, and so bending economic laws to your own ideology. No, let's all agree what the economic laws are that creates the most amount of wealth in the fairest way. And then on top of that, we can impose our ideology in terms of how we think we should best redistribute some of that wealth to others who really need it, or how what we should spend on infrastructure or whatever. And so anyway, so I think it is a good idea that people become more economically literate when they're younger. But I do have one reservation in that if it was done today, it would just be reinforced because it would be the nonsense that would be taught to them. So it would reinforce this something for nothing myth, reinforce debt fueled consumption policies, deficits don't matter. So printing more money, we need more inflation. All of these things are terrible, but we could end up with more of it because those in power are the ones who decide on the curriculum, if you will, or determine how economics is actually going to be taught. So if they're teaching my book, I'd be all for it. But
Yeah, I would be too. I would be too. So you're talking about like this the undercurrent of, the statement you just made. Like if we started teaching it, the reality is that we wouldn't be restoring it back to the original principles of economics, restoring it to the original intent of money, because the culture has grabbed a hold of, the way of this, debt-based society, consumption-based society. I talk a lot about commerce in the way that how can we become more community based around the commerce and recognize the value exchange that one another has, whether it's you're actually producing a thing like a bike or a suit, or you're exchanging knowledge and expertise that somebody else needs and that's building them up in value that then they
yeah,
can go and exchange, especially in the realm of education, thought leadership, consulting, all of these kind of more less tangible services, but they're tangible in the outcomes.
yeah.
So I love that you talked about GDP because I wanted to go into that. I wanted to talk about there was an area in the book that you really started diving into the role of money in society and the importance of consent in exchanging a value, especially when you start applying payments to it. And there's different payment methods out there. I've been dealing with payment methods my entire career, from the debit card to the credit card. It's pay with something you have, prepay, pay later. Those are the form factors of payments, but it's the
Mhm.
principles and it's the intentions, the decision that you make to use one of those payments. So let's talk about that consent and how you really describe it being disrupted or even invisibly violated, the consent that's not being given intentionally by society and the customers out there.
Yeah, yeah, okay, sure. So the key is really understanding the difference between money and capital. Now, we touched on it earlier, but just to sort of bring it home, it's the creation of capital that makes the world go round, not the creation of money. We use money to exchange all the capital that we're producing, either in the form of a good or a service. So you can have an economy with capital and no money. It wouldn't be very big, but you could have one. You could not have an economy with money and no capital because you could have all the money in the world, but if there's no capital out there to go and buy, then it's worthless. So let's say you you build 10 bikes. Yeah, so you've created 10 bikes of capital. You sell them for $1,000 each. So you got $10,000 sitting in your bank account. What that $10,000 effectively represents is the 10 bikes that you created. When you go and spend that $10,000, what gave you the wherewithal to go and spend was the fact that you created 10 bikes, right? This is the fount of all economic prosperity, the creation of capital. So you got 10,000 bucks in your bank. Now, before you get a chance to spend it, let's say you're waiting till the end of the year, you're going to go on a nice trip. Before you get a chance to go on your trip, the central bank doubles the money supply. Now, when the central bank creates new money, they do not create capital in order to get that money. They just create it out of thin air. So the newly created money has no capital stored up in it. But as soon as it comes into the economy, it obtains capital from the rest of the money already in existence. So as soon as it comes into the economy, it takes 5 of your 10 bikes from your $10,000 and puts it into the new money. So your bank statement still says that you've got 10,000 bucks in your bank account, so you're feeling pretty good, but it only stores 5 bikes of capital instead of 10. So now your $10,000 will only buy half as much as it would have done before the central bank doubled the money supply. And of course, this is in the form of inflation. That trip you were going to go on has now doubled in price. It's going to cost $20,000 instead of 10. And so now you can't afford it. And so that's how your capital is extracted from your money savings, extracted from your wages and your purchasing power, and given to somebody else. And that's why my book is called Capital Offence, Why Some Benefit at Your Expense, because they take your capital from your money without your permission. We do not vote for that. We vote for how much we think is fair to be taxed. I'm sure we all agree we're taxed too much, but we can vote for that, or how much debt the government is taking on, how much they're borrowing to spend. But we don't get to vote or say how much of our capital they can take from our money by printing money. And this is an
No,
unelected,
we don't.
by the way, part of the government that does this. So it's just completely wrong.
It is completely wrong. And, for the audience that's listening, if you're trying to figure out, like, where is this showing up in my life? Every time you question, wasn't that box of cereal bigger? Wasn't that, size? I mean, you look at the candy bars and you look at the prices that go up and they just kind of appear. They just kind of show up. And it's like, wait a second, I'm getting less in the volume of box of chips or, whatever you're buying at the grocery store. It's not getting any, bigger in the produced foods. The only
Yeah.
thing that stays the same are the vegetables and the fruits, right? Because those grow. Those are
Yeah.
produced and, but prices of them go up. But that's a great analogy that I always use when I try to figure out what do they mean by my purchasing power is being lost? And the purchasing power is in the produced goods. And that's kind of the way that I taught my kids and my community is that's what that means to me is go out and look around and see what you're actually trying to buy and what are the price tags. Number one, we feel that immediately in the gas and all of the, the produced assets that we're trying to purchase or acquire. Even the movie ticket, those movie tickets are going up. So they are robbing our purchasing power by this printing of money. We just aren't really directly feeling it, but you're absolutely right. We did not give consent.
No, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So, and I want to talk about because part of the work and some of the folks that I've had on the show here, Paul, really represent some of the we'll just call them the non-mainstream populations. And a lot of them are dealing with, underserved individuals, individuals that are already economically disadvantaged. They deal with cash flow challenges. They're probably the most common audience for when a financial institution goes out and does financial literacy, which is like kind of a check the box where I have to have a checklist of things to finish a product or a program, is the community nonprofit. And the community nonprofit, I have a nonprofit myself, and there's a lot of there's financial literacy out there, but there isn't really economic literacy. And so as I was reading your book, and there was a section I got into around the island economy. And the island economy is, I could relate that to a lot of the entrepreneurial programs that are going on at the high schools, in the colleges. There's, business classes or teaching how to build a business to go through all of the I call it the gauntlet, this form and that form, and to get your business entity created in order to be able to do business and to facilitate business, which is really kind of a farce because that's in under an entity of doing business. But I'm a CEO of myself right now with the knowledge and the information that I have, and I can produce as an individual. And it's just a matter of who am I exchanging that value with. But I loved your analogy of the island economy in the book because it reminded me of, just immersing yourself in a concept of I am stuck on an island, and who are the stakeholders that I'm going to trade my skills or my whatever I'm producing on that island to sustain myself. And there's been a lot of conversation around why are we paying for power? Why, when there's all of these God given things on the planet that somebody has taken ownership to, What is that changing in this concept of the island economy? And what does it truly mean to be an entrepreneur? And can you talk a little bit about that section of the entrepreneur and the person that's willing to invest capital? Because you talked about this in your book as well, and how they actually really benefit those stakeholders of the island economy.
Yeah, so, I finished my weekly blog with a sign off, and it's be free and do no harm.
Right.
And and by being free, what I'm essentially saying is do whatever you want. Don't let anybody else tell you that what you're doing is wrong or you should be doing this or you should be spending that or no, you be free. You do what you want as long as it does not harm anybody else financially, emotionally, physically. And if you had everybody being free and doing no harm, and you did that on a regular basis, it's almost impossible not to have a beneficial impact on society. And so, as an entrepreneur, I mean, these are the real heroes, I think, of the economy. And in my acknowledgement section of my book, I mention a number of entrepreneurs. Like one's a bike shop owner, one owns a bakery, one owns a clock shop. I collect mechanical clocks, so I'm there on a regular basis. One's a butcher, lives across the street. But just watching how hard these people work, the hours that they put in, the passion that they have for their business, and the customer value proposition that they offer, I'm just so impressed. And had another one I mentioned was a pizzeria in Brooklyn. So these are friends of ours. They're our neighbors in Florida. We have a condo in Florida. And the pizzeria was started by Maria's father, immigrant from Italy in 1967 or something like that. And it was quite famous. Like movies had been shot there, like a film crew from Korea came in and it's closed now, but it was a really cool place. And she was just talking about what it was like and growing up in a family that owned a pizzeria. And her dad worked his butt off for decades. And when they back in the '70s and the '80s, when they were having a family vacation, he would drive the family from Brooklyn to the Poconos on a Sunday morning, spend a day with them, drive back because he had to work in the pizzeria for the week, and then he would go pick up his family the following Sunday. Now, you can argue that's not the best lifestyle, and, you'd like to have more time with your family, but the point is that this guy took not a cent more out of the system than he put in, and probably put in a lot more. But it's hard work. He loves his customers. It's honest business. And again, if you've got so many people doing that kind of thing in all different sorts, it could be a massage therapist, it could be whatever. No, but providing an honest value proposition to your customers, thinking about how I can make this value proposition even better. How much do I have to reinvest in my business so I can provide the same customer value proposition and maybe even lower the price a little bit? And so I can attract more customers and grow sales that way, as opposed to like what you were saying earlier with the shrinkflation. Companies try to increase their profit by screwing the customer, by diminishing the value proposition. So you got a box of cookies, there's 30 cookies in it, it's $5. And all of a sudden it's still $5, but there's only 28 cookies instead of 30. They hope you don't notice that you've just been screwed 2 cookies. Their profit margin goes up a little bit. They try to drive their share price higher that way. Not all companies do this, by the way, and I can talk about good corporate culture companies as well. But anyways, this is the way it's supposed to work. And so in the island economy, I just start off very simply, as you know, one person catches fish, one person catches coconuts, one person catches or collects liters of water, and they exchange those with each other throughout the day. and nobody is worse off. Nobody's benefiting at anybody else's expense. But then I start to expand it, introduce money, and then the trouble starts because somebody now has got the printing press and all that kind of stuff. But as you've seen, like in the book, I do try to go step by step. I don't use financial economic jargon. I don't try to intimidate people and try to empower people with understanding and knowledge. And maybe one specific thing I'll comment on the island economy example that I gave. Um, so a lot of people were trying to blame the inflation that we had in recent years on supply shocks. That was not the cause. It had an impact on some goods for sure. But you had um, record imports of loaded containers coming into the ports in California.
Mhm,
Records. So the
mhm,
prices were going up because people in America were spending like never before. And they were spending like never before because the Federal Reserve, the central bank, printed trillions of dollars to help fund all the stimulus checks that both governments put out, by the way, like it was Trump and Biden, right? Both did it. The issues transcend politics. I don't think either of them are bad people. They just misunderstand how an economy works and want to be popular. So they make popular short-term decisions rather than responsible and sometimes painful long-term decisions. So to help explain that, in my island economy, I said, so now let's assume that there's a supply shock in the coconut industry. So Shirley, who collects coconuts, she can only collect two coconuts instead of three. And so now the supply of coconuts has gone down. So it used to be one coconut for one fish or one coconut for 1 liter of water. But now one coconut's going to cost two fish and one coconut's going to cost 2 liters of water. So now people will say, oh, look, there was a supply shock in coconuts. Now the price of coconuts has gone up. It costs two fish instead of one. It costs 2 liters of water instead of one. See, it's a supply shock. Well, no, because the price of fish and water has just gone down in terms of coconuts. It used to cost one coconut. Now it only costs half a coconut to buy a liter of water or half a coconut to buy one fish. Inflation, the definition of inflation is a general and consistent rise in the prices of all things. And that cannot happen when we are just exchanging capital with each other. If one
mhm.
capital becomes more expensive, then that means the capital you're exchanging it for has just gotten cheaper. You can only have a consistent rise or general rise in all prices once one of two things happens. First, you have to introduce money into the economy. And second, the amount of money in the economy needs to consistently increase. Or you could have a situation where the amount of stuff being produced consistently decreases. But that never happens. What we've had for decades is the money supply growing faster than the amount of stuff being produced. So you have more and more money per item of capital, and so the prices of that capital necessarily goes up. We should be experiencing what's called good deflation. So in America, in the last 30 years of the 1800s, you had money growth that was only 4% or so. Believe it or not, that's a slow growth for money supply. And the amount of stuff being produced was exploding higher, growing much faster than 4%. So you had 30 years of slowly falling prices for consumer goods, for capital. So even if you were on a flat wage, even if your wages were not going up, every year you were becoming wealthier in real terms because your flat wage could buy more and more stuff. That's the way it's supposed to work. The consumer is supposed to be the ultimate beneficiary of all this, but they're not because central banks increase the money supply along with commercial banks faster than the amount of stuff that can be produced in the economy.
Mm. And we wonder why some of these principles have become so diluted, you know? It's like when the game is changing or when there's a specific kind of undercurrent that's going on and you got a population that hasn't really been taught the principles. of and the fundamentals of money and economics, but are taught other types of patterns like budget, save, borrow, and there's a specific kind of sequence to what they're taught on in addition to consumption and consuming based on debt, right? And I remember that was in part of my young days was, here's a credit card and they issue and they start you in at students, in your school.
Huh.
And then it's, oh, here's another opportunity to finance something for your, other life milestones. So we have to be responsible with debt and use it in responsible ways, and but yet the individuals that are kind of in living outside in these real dire disadvantaged areas, they have needs, and that's what they kind of grab to, is whatever I can grab to fill that need. There's some decisions and choices that people have made. So what I love about the island economy, though, is that you can kind of immerse yourself in this, fictitious place in a sense, and really look at the players that are having an impact on that economy, as if you were to just kind of step away from the real world for a minute and really try to imagine what you're trying to teach in your book. And that's really what I thought you did really well. And feel like that's a lesson that can go into the schools, and really, instead of the typical financial literacy, let's really talk about economic empowerment and economic literacy, because I think that those are the principles that are missing at a young age, when they're still hearing by, you want to be this influencer, you want to be a YouTube creator, so some of the different jobs that are creating is to get them really thinking about, what am I producing that's valuable for exchange with another person in the local economy in which my community that I live and work in.
Yeah,
And I
and
think that
the
that's a
more
really key piece that's missing.
yeah, and the more people that are able to create capital, the more people that are able to contribute to the economy, the better off we all are. And I think we
Yeah,
probably talked a little bit about it before, that there should be equal opportunity, but there isn't. And that's something that a
right.
lot of people are working on tirelessly, and we need to do more. Um, and some people will push back. Well, look at that guy. He came from a poor family and he became a millionaire. Yeah, but that's the exception, right? Some people are just born exceptional. If I was born poor, I would have a really hard time climbing out of that because I'm not exceptional, right? So pointing to one person who's able to do it, you know, that doesn't hold muster in my opinion. So
Right.
making the work so outcomes should not be fair, but opportunities should be. The opportunity to create an outcome for yourself should be equal. Whether or not you take advantage of that opportunity is up to you. So let's say you have a bike shop and you make 10 bikes per week, and I've got a bike shop and I decide I'd rather just make one bike a week and then go bird watching the rest of the time. That's my decision. Well, guess what? Your wealth is going to be 10 times mine, and that is completely fair and deserved. And I've got no right to complain about it. Right. But the unfairness, as I said, is in the opportunity side. So, but just imagine if we have that many more people, understanding economics, understanding what capital is, providing customer value propositions or great value propositions for their employers and being rewarded and essentially being rewarded with capital. And, when I'm, when I go get cash out of the bank machine, the way I like to think about it is what's coming out of that machine is not money. It's the investment services that I provided to my clients over all those years. And then when I spend my money, that's what I'm transferring effectively some of the investment services that I provided that's my capital. It just happens to be in the form of money. But if you can get people thinking in terms of capital rather than money, then they'll much better understand that you just cannot print your way to nirvana. You hear this all the time still. Can't we just increase the money supply and we'll all be better off? No, you'll be way worse off because it's a hidden theft. It's a hidden tax on the rest of people who've already earned their money.
And this has been such a great layer of like just a basic layer as I kind of build up what this podcast is really all supposed to be about is just to get us starting to think about things differently, starting to think about where do we get emotionally locked up and blocked with emotions around how we exchange our value when we can't. And when money prevents us from doing that, right? It's either I'm trying to build a business and I have no access to capital because I don't know how to open the door. I don't know how to, really go about running the gauntlet that today's, investment activities require and all of the things that it takes to build a business entity. And yes, the opportunity is there for everyone, but the access isn't, Paul. And you just talked about that.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that they're not getting informed and educated in a way. So they get trapped in a system that keeps them down, even though they have the same opportunity and strength as a young baby. And I use this analogy all the time is that as young children, as babies, nobody looks at all of the line of babies that are coming out of the hospitals and saying, you're going to stay poor and you're going to become rich.
Hmm.
You're going to become this investor and you're going to become the janitor. Those are things that environmentally and culturally and
Yep.
characteristically happen to us. And
Yes.
I think that's where, I'm really on this journey with this podcast to say we have to go back to the basics to figure out why are individuals getting stuck? Why are communities growing and why are some not? And is it economics? And what other things is it that's causing those disadvantages or inequities, to happen?
Yeah.
And it's really an interesting place to take someone up and out of their day-to-day and their normal scene. And I that's why I really appreciated your book. I was really honored when I had the opportunity to meet with you and to hear
Oh,
about the
thank
journey that you were on and just to see the alignment for what I'm trying to do with the show and in the work that I do with my nonprofit is to really help people get back to basics and figure out what commerce was actually designed to be.
you.
And
Hmm.
I want to have you on the show again when we have some other movements with some of the work that I'm doing, because this today was really about setting the stage for how can we remember what's inside of us and remember to let go of some of the thoughts and the things that keep us all locked up and so that we can get out there and exchange our value and really remember that we are creators and producers. And your book just gives people that hope again. That's what I really felt.
Well, thank you, Connie. I really appreciate your comments and listen, happy to have an ongoing conversation and helping you with your journey, which I think is amazing what it is you're trying to do. And we'll all benefit from your success, you know?
I hope so. I hope that I can inspire the audience that's listening. We can challenge status quo and we're not stuck in systems because the systems are, and I say this all the time with the technology, and I look at, investors and the potential with, some of the new technology that's coming out, the AI, where some of the dollars are being invested. And, where can we create more meaning for our communities? And that's the next actual conversation I'd love to have with you, Paul, is how do we evolve the investor's perspective for the investment investors like yourself that are might be retiring? And how do we inspire what true innovation and investment of capital can look like to really restore our communities and restore our markets and our economies? Because
Mhm.
there are a lot of places and a lot of projects that need dollars spent to reinforce infrastructure and to sustain business communities the way that they are and to fix things that are become really big gaps. So I would love to have you back on so that we could have that conversation. But I wish you so much luck with this book. I think you've
Well,
done
thank you.
an amazing job. I know it took you a long time to write it, but what a legacy to leave behind.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all your comments, and, yeah, I look forward to, chatting with you about this, any number of times you want in the future, Connie.
Okay, I will take you up on that. But thank you for being on the show with us. And I'm glad to see you again. And we'll see you again soon. And for everybody tuning in, thank you for listening. I hope that this was a very fundamental conversation to bring you some back to basics around economics. And I know there's a lot of words and a lot of buzzwords out there, but hopefully Paul's analogies and metaphors and examples really simplified some things in your mind. So leave some comments, subscribe so you can see when Paul comes back on the show, because we're going to have him back here again. And Paul, thanks again for your time today.
Oh, thank you, Connie. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Unlocking Commerce and Business. If this conversation resonated, here's what you can do. Subscribe for weekly conversations with survivors, innovators, and changemakers, building regenerative alternatives to extractive commerce. Share this episode with collaborators, partners, funders, and changemakers in your network. The people ready for restorative commerce need to hear these voices. Drop a comment below. Tell us what patterns you're recognizing or what solutions you're building. We read every one. Commerce is everywhere, and healing extraction patterns inside our communities creates regenerative commerce outside. Like a lighthouse, we're here, exploring and cutting through fog, pointing toward what works. Welcome to the era of restorative commerce. Until next time, explore courageously, build sovereignly. You are the source and store of value. This is Connie Davis signing off. Thank you for being here.